Let's Talk on LoveWorld Plus. Now, since last week, a wave of furious anti-Western protest against a film marking the Prophet Muhammad has simmered, with different Western embassies and consulates being attacked in different parts of the world. Now, though the attacks have abated in some countries, the anti-Western sentiment lingers. Now, in the midst of all these, what exactly is the way forward? Is there a way to retrace our steps from this escalating animosity which is engulfing the world? Now, today we are going to be looking at world security amid rising anti-US protests, which has been in the news for quite a while. And to help me look at this and talk about it, I have with me Chinedu Chidi. Chinedu Chidi is the founder of the Book Rain Initiative. He is an international relations expert and a political analyst. And if you will recall, he's also the winner of the Debaters TV reality show, the second season. Now, we are looking at world security amid anti-US protests. Okay, now it all started on the anniversary of the September 11 anniversary. Yes, that's when it really began. You know, we had the protests coinciding with that. On that same day, the U.S. consulate in Libya, Benghazi, was attacked, and the ambassador, Chris Stevens, was killed, including 3 Americans. You know, when I first heard about it, of course, everyone couldn't help but notice that it did coincide with the September 11 anniversary. What really were your thoughts when you heard about this? I mean, does there appear to be some sort of an agenda? The way, was it orchestrated? What were your thoughts when the news first broke about the protests coming?
Well, first and foremost, I want to say that it's great to be here. It's always a pleasure, an incredible pleasure to be here. So I'm glad with the work you guys are doing, helping to disseminate information and help shape the perceptions of the people around the world for good. And now, as I looked at my TV screens on September the 11th, the anniversary of the attack of the World Trade Center in the United States, as I heard the news, the first thing that came to my mind was that this is actually no surprise that the people in the Middle East could march to the streets and actively express their disgust or anger or angst against a media production that was considered absolutely inciting and was very offensive to their religious sensibilities. Now, whether it was orchestrated or not, I think it remains to be seen, but I think that security agencies around the world concerned with this particular attack believe that there must have been some organized, calculated attempt by some extremist groups to seize the moment, take advantage of the mass protests to actually perpetrate their long, calculated and long-drawn anger against the United States of America. But by and large, I believe that this was a fury that was expected. The Middle East, if you look at the context of the Middle East and the history of the Middle East, I think there are people who match a reaction to religious incitement with an active protest and expression of fury against whatever they consider to be offensive to their religion. They take it seriously. They're hypersensitive to religious offense.
Okay. Now, this wasn't the first time that such a thing has happened. We still remember the cartoons, you know, published in a Danish newspaper that had cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad, which, of course, according to Islam, is forbidden. And we saw the protests that generated and all the people that died. Now, really, what is the history? Can we have a little background as to what really began this anti-Western sentiment? Because anyone could do something and then the blame goes to the West or the US in this case. So what really started it? Has it always been like that? Or, you know, just at the slightest provocation, they target the West?
I think there's always existed religious tension between Christianity and Islam. As far back as when Islam came to be, there's always been religious tension between Islam and between Christianity. And I think it is important to state that there is a very powerful perception in the Middle East and across the Muslim world, and the Muslim world across the world, that the United States represents a sort of monolithic, powerful, organized representation of Christianity, so to speak,
Okay.
rightly or wrongly, that the United States seems to be the image of global Christianity as it is today and dating back to distant history. Now, I think that this strong perception in the Middle East accounts for why the United States is perceived as an enemy of the Middle East, because the United States is believed to represent Christianity as it is in the world today. So with United States' far-reaching influence across the world, including the Middle East, and some of their foreign policy decisions that haven't actually gone down well with Muslims and Muslim-dominated countries and some Islamic republics across the world, it is believed that the United States is driving an agenda that seems to support the spread of Christianity and the protection of Christian interests, especially also as it has to do with United States alliance with Israel,
Okay.
which is considered a sworn enemy by many in the Middle East. So United States alliance with Israel, United States massive representation of the image of Christianity as perceived by the Middle East, whether rightly or wrongly. I think these things have developed a very strong antagonism, a very strong difference, if you like, on the part of Muslim-dominated countries, and they are hypersensitive to actions of the United States. There are certain things that may stem from another country, and there won't be such a strong, immediate, active, massive reaction like we saw.
Yeah.
But I believe that because it is believed very strongly that the United States represents Christianity, the United States represents the sovereign face, if you like, of Christianity in today's world, that it, stimulates a sort of aggression, and the people are always on the edge as far as the United States is concerned, rightly or wrongly.
Wrongly. I would agree with you on that, because there was in the news not very long ago about this in Pakistan, about this Christian girl who was thrown in jail because allegedly she had torn pages out of the Quran and burnt them or something like that. We later did hear in the news that it was in fact an imam, a Muslim cleric, who did that and planted it on the girl. Now, he was the one that tore the Quran, and yes, it's still blasphemous, it still has the death penalty, but he was the one that tore it. And since then, we've not really heard much about that imam, about that cleric. Instead, we've heard about threats about the Christian girl and her family and all of that. So yes, it would appear that this is really beyond just the movie. It's about Christianity and it's about Islam. But let's quickly talk about whether this really was orchestrated or not. Now, in the news, we had that eminent Muslim leaders, like in Libya and even the president of Egypt, Mohamed Morsi, they actually made a statement. They said that foreigners came into Libya to do what they did. The president of Egypt did say that among the thousands of protesters who took part in those demonstrations were actually paid to do what they did. And just this morning, we did hear in the news that the leader of the Hezbollah is urging for more protests to take place today, actually. What do you think about that? You did mention something like that, but do you really think that this was orchestrated by some person or some group of people just to cause chaos and violence and confusion?
I think, let me make this clear, that I think the movie is enough, more than enough, to stimulate a fury, massive fury, even a violent protest around the Middle East. I mean, given the context and the history of civil reaction and struggles in the Middle East, I think the movie is more than enough to have stimulated such a massive, angry reaction to what was considered absolutely blasphemous. I absolutely believe that. I think that is factual. I think that is practical. If you look at the history of Islamic reactions across the world, even in Nigeria, statements, verbal statements have been enough to drive people into the streets to express their angry reaction to what is considered absolutely blasphemous. So I think the movie is more than enough to have stimulated such a massive reaction from Muslims across the Muslim world. Now, if there were orchestrated acts to destabilize the United States' interest in the Middle East. I think that that is also of plausible consideration. I've listened to international experts and security experts who have said that there are extremists, religious extremists, within the context of these different occurrences across the Muslim world who seized the opportunity to perpetrate their own interest because it was September 11th. They decided to react to United States, especially United States drone attacks into the Middle East, especially in Pakistan and some in Afghanistan, etc. So they seized the opportunity. The atmosphere was created. There was some level of disorganization as a result of the mass protests, and so it was the perfect timing to actually launch a terrorist attack, if you like, against the United States and United States' interest in the Middle East, in those specific countries that were affected. But whether or not the movie was actually insightful enough or inciting enough to have moved the people into the streets, I think that there's no debate about that. It is absolutely I've seen the movie, actually. I've seen the 14-minute trailer, and I understand why Muslims should be angry and why they should, you know, express their dissatisfaction and, you know, with the production of the movie and all. So I understand that, considering the state of the Muslim world, the tradition of public reaction to whatever is considered offensive, I think the movie was potent enough to have generated such a mass protest and such a fury.
Okay. Well, we're still talking about world security amid anti-U.S. protests that have been going on for the past few days. And I'm still talking with Chinedu Chidi, who is an international relations expert as well as a political analyst. Now, let's talk just for a little while about the propriety of that movie. I mean, what would make someone who obviously knows that doing that would generate that sort of response go ahead and produce such a movie for whatever reason? You know, you go ahead and do that. And of course, in the news, we had the actors, the cast, and the crew that took part in the movie say, we were deceived. You know, this was not what we thought we were taking part in. As far as we were concerned, we were taking part in an adventure action movie, you know, and all of that. So why would anybody even do that in the first place?
Well, I think that's a psychological, and it could be a sociological as well as a cultural question. I mean, I can't speak for anybody, but I understand very clearly that Nakula actually powered this movie for a particular reason. He understood that there was going to be this mass reaction. There is nobody who doesn't understand that anything considered offensive to Islam was going to generate a massive reaction from the Muslim world. So I think that's a constant. He understood that this was going to generate this reaction. But you have to look at the socio-cultural context or the socio-cultural background of Nakula, the Coptic Egyptian Christian in the first place. You have to look at Coptic Christianity in Egypt and how there's been this tension, very serious tension between Egyptian Coptic Christians and Muslims in Egypt, and of course in some other parts of the Arab world. So you have to understand that Nakula perhaps was trying to project the extreme reaction to Islamic treatment perhaps in Egypt and other parts of the Muslim world. Nakula understood that this was going to generate this aggression, this anger, this fury, and went ahead to do it. So I think on his part, it was an attempt to stimulate aggression in the Middle East, to offend. It was a deliberate, calculated attempt to offend Islamic sensibilities. And I think he's achieved that, unfortunately, at the cost and at the expense of lives, innocent people across the world, and an attack on United States consulate. And I think something else that is important and should be considered always, it's been a factor in such massive protests and reaction across the Middle East, is that there is this generalization of image that happens in the Middle East. Whenever something considered anti-Islamic is done, the first conclusion that the average Muslim reaches, especially in the Middle East and even in Africa, is that this person must be representing America, and this person is a Christian, definitely. Now, in this case, coincidentally, this happens to be a Coptic Christian. Whether that relates to his personal allegiance to the Christian faith or not, doesn't seem to matter. Whether or not he doesn't represent American interest in the first place. He lives in America. He's an American, he's an Egyptian American. He lives in California, but he doesn't represent American interest. He doesn't represent the belief of the majority of Americans or Christians around the world. So I think that reaction to attack the United States embassies and foreign interests across the Middle East reflects what I said earlier, that the United States is believed to be this monolithic, massive, gigantic image of Christianity around the world. And whatever happens from America or from any individual in America, seems to be in sync with their believed and perceived interest that America represents, which is to aggressively advance Christianity and deliberately, in a calculated fashion, offend Islam. I think that this is a faulty perception, and it's sad that it has gotten to this extent, and it led to crippling of the United States' interest in the Middle East. And it's not the first time. I remember that the United States ambassador was actually killed in 1979, Adolph Swords, I think. And, it was an attempted kidnap, and then it led to his death. So since 1979, this is the second time that the United States ambassador would have been killed. But United States embassies have always been attacked over 26 times, I think, in history. Over 26 times United States embassies have been attacked. So there's always, but in some of those cases, it was clearly isolated cases of extremist attacks on United States missions in the Middle East, clearly easily defined terrorist attacks and targets on United States diplomatic missions in the Middle East. In this case, it is difficult to isolate the extremists from the mob. Hillary Clinton said something that they didn't substitute, and that it shouldn't be, the Arab Spring shouldn't substitute the tyranny of dictatorship with the tyranny of the mob. And I think that's a very important observation and something for them to consider, that in expressing such massive anger and reaction to whatever was considered offensive, and which the United States have condemned in very strong terms, even attracting criticism from political opposition in the United States, from the United States government, I think that the people would have understood that it was important to peacefully, there is nothing wrong with peacefully expressing your distaste with whatever you consider offensive to your religion or for anything. And let's not forget that religion is what is closest to man's heart and closest to man's soul. So if people massively, actively, angrily express their angst against whatever is considered offensive to their religion, it is not surprising, it shouldn't be condemned. If people could protest over income, people could protest over an economic policy, people could protest over their sexual orientation, and people could protest over rights on other lower levels of things. Let's understand that religion is something very attached to the human heart. So I'm not surprised that there is protest. That's right.
Okay, now the United States, the President Barack Obama has actually said that he vowed that he was going to fish out the perpetrators, that they would not go unpunished, that he would seek justice. And, we also did have in the news that he began deploying weapons and surveillance drones into Libya. Now, we are talking about world security amidst all this animosity, all this violence, all these demonstrations. How do you see this play out? And don't forget, Barack Obama said it is not going to affect the relations that they have with Libya. They're going to continue to maintain that relationship that they have with Libya. But how do you see this play out with all these weapons being deployed into Libya and all of that? What do you think about that?
To just clarify, not exactly weapons. I think they sent special ops, Marines, to help secure American citizens and whatever is left of American missions in some of these countries. So it was an attempt actually to prevent a deterioration and a worsening of the situation on ground, and to ensure that we do not have further casualties on ground. So it was actually an attempt, a reactionary attempt, and an attempt to safeguard the lives and property and interest of the United States in these countries. Now, having said that, I think that the United States government is actually towing a very fine line. They understand that there is actually a delicate situation in the Middle East. These governments that emerged, some of the governments that emerged post-Arab Spring, are still quite fragile, they're still quite weak, their democratic roots are still taking shape, and they're not fully democratically structured. And it's a very delicate situation, especially, for instance, in Libya, that the security situation in Libya is weak, the Libyan government is extremely weak. The Libyan leader actually admitted that they do not have the capacity to contain the threat posed by extremists in Libya. So the United States understands that. That's why it wasn't quick to condemn any of these governments, but gave them a rather stern warning and made it very clear, unequivocally clear, that you cannot stand idly by while negative interests or elements perpetrate their negative agenda against United States interests in these countries. So I think they made it very clear. Now, how to achieve security is by partnership with these governments that are legitimate, governments elected by the people. Now, what these governments have to do, I think, is they've expressed their willingness to partner with the United States to ensure that there is absolute security of United States missions in those countries. United Nations has a military capacity that these countries lack. So it's by cooperation, by partnership, ensuring that there is a capacity enhancement of local security to ensure that they have the needed capacity to stem the tide of anti-U.S. agenda in those countries and to ensure that you have U.S. missions are secure. Now, in the case of Khartoum, I watched it and I followed it very carefully. I think in that case, it was in the case of some selected extremists perpetrating their agenda. I think it was a mob action, and the people expressed their anger. It could have happened in any part, even in Nigeria.
Yeah.
If security would not check it, I think that the people could have gone, and if they burnt down a U.S. embassy, I wouldn't have been surprised. So I think we shouldn't try to think that it is only some terrorist or extremist elements amongst the mob that can actually perpetrate such an action. But I think the United States was smart, diplomatically smart, to try to douse tension and try to explain that the movie that was provocative and that what they considered absolutely abhorrent doesn't represent United States policy, doesn't represent United States beliefs, doesn't represent the core values of the United States or the perception or vision of the United States as regards Islam or the Middle East. They made it very clear. And they also made it very clear that they believe that the people have a right to express their distaste, their dissatisfaction, their anger, their angst against whatever was considered absolutely offensive to their religion. I think they made that very clear. But they understand that it's a delicate line and that they have to strike the balance. You can condemn the attack on United States missions, but you must also understand that this is their climb, and you must find a way to empower the government, enhance their capacity, and stem the tide of anti-U.S. agenda.
Okay, now on a final note, and you know, we're talking about world security. Now, if you look all over the world, there is growing tension, you know, not just the Muslim world and the West. You know, we have in Japan about the disputed islands, there are demonstrations, protests going on as regards that the West, or the U.S. is regarded as some sort of bully. You know, even Latin America is anti-West. Okay, you guys feel you can come here and dictate to us how to do our things and all of that. Now, amid all those things, do you see world security possible? Do you think it's going to continue? Do you think it's going to escalate? Or do you think it is actually possible to curb this and to, you know, actually control this to whatever extent?
Well, first and foremost, I'm not a prophet.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Yeah, you're not, but you can.
Yeah, of course. We can only analyze the
speculate.
present and look at the curve, the direction of the present into the future, and make postulations or prognostications based on our practical evaluation of current affairs. Now, but what I think very clearly is that I do not believe in the concept of the peace of the graveyard. It doesn't exist. It will not exist. Now, there will be agitations. There will be protests by people who are dissatisfied, people who feel they've been cheated or offended, or they have been deprived of their rights. People would protest, people would agitate. There would be tension in the world. I think that what will guarantee peace is the effective management of tensions that are a natural reflection of a human reality.
Okay.
There will be tensions, there will be disagreements, there will be antipathy. Unfortunately, it's a reality. But it's the effective management of these tensions and this animosity and these disagreements that would actually create a peaceful order. And I think that's why the United Nations exists, and that's why governments exist, and that's why mediators exist. And I believe very strongly that we as a people in the world must realize that peace is not another alternative. Peace is absolute. Peace is necessary. Peace is something that would help to create the much needed atmosphere for the collective advancement of the people in this 21st century and beyond. So I think we're at a point in history where we must realize that the decisions we make would either mar or make us, would either break or shape us. And so we must understand that we cannot pursue a policy that is anti-peace or pursue a path that will lead to the destruction of peoples or create or portend great danger to the survival of people. So we must understand that.
Okay. Well, we had been talking about world security amid anti-U.S. protests going on in different parts of the world. And my guest has about said it. In conclusion, violence really does not pay. As much as you have the right to express your anger or your dissatisfaction, you do not do that at the expense of another life. And then every institution also has the responsibility to see to it that peace is achieved through whatever means. If it's dialogue, if it's negotiation, if it's compromise, there should be peace. And just like he said, peace is absolutely necessary. Well, I had been talking with Chinedu Chidi, who is the founder of the Book Rain Initiative. He's also an international relations expert and a political analyst. He also is the winner of the Debaters TV reality show, the second season. Thank you so much for coming today and shedding more light on this particular issue.
A pleasure.
All right, and definitely we are not done talking about this. We still expect to have so much information about that in the news, but we will see how it goes. However, we do urge restraint and peace, which is the solution actually. Thank you very much for being part of this particular edition of Let's Talk. We will do this again tomorrow, same time, on this show and on this station, LoveWorld Plus. Please do join us again tomorrow.